Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hey everybody, John McAdams here, and this is episode 132 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. Well, I just got back from that muzzleloader javelina hunt I've been telling you about for the past couple of months, and I have good news. I punched my javelina tag up in New Mexico. So today, I'm going to tell you how the hunt went, share a few lessons I learned, and also share a few recommendations for you to keep in mind if you want to go javelina hunting in the future. Now, like I covered back in episode 123, where I discussed my goals for 2021, I wanted to do more hunting with a muzzleloader this year. So I planned on starting 2021 off with a muzzleloader javelina hunt in New Mexico, and luckily, things panned out for me. So now, let's talk a little bit about how that hunt went. I moved to El Paso in 2017, and I applied for a mule deer tag in New Mexico based on a tip I got from my old college roommate who's from El Paso. Long story short, I drew that tag and I ended up shooting a mule deer in that unit the very first season that I hunted in New Mexico. I initially had no idea that any javelina lived in that unit until I saw a few on that first hunt there. I ended up hunting deer in that same unit 3 years in a row, and I consistently saw javelina out there while I was looking for deer, and I even bumped into them a few times while I was out walking around. I did not have a javelina tag for those first few hunts because I was brand new to the area and I didn't know the ins and outs of hunting in New Mexico, and also since I was mainly focusing on hunting deer. However, New Mexico does offer a couple of different pretty cool options for hunting javelina. So first off, you can put in for a special limited draw for a couple of units, units 19 and 23 through 28. You can also buy an over-the-counter javelina tag that is good for most of the rest of the state, aside from those units that you have to draw that I just mentioned. Now, depending on the exact tag, the javelina season runs in January, February, or March. Now, a cool benefit of having one of those tags is that the state also allows you to use it to hunt javelina while you're out hunting deer or elk. Some of the javelina tags are good during the regular javelina season and for the specific unit and dates for certain deer and or elk hunts. So for instance, I could have bought a javelina tag that would have been good for my October deer hunts in the past and would have also been valid for the statewide javelina season in January, February, and March. And as a matter of fact, that's exactly what I did during the 2019-2020 season. I had a muzzleloader deer tag for that unit and a javelina tag in my pocket. I ended up seeing a group of javelina during my deer hunt, but they slipped away before I could close the distance. However, I did end up filling that javelina tag a few months later during the javelina season in January of 2020. Now, I shot that javelina with my 300 Win Mag, and you can hear the story of that hunt in episode 75. Well, let's fast forward to this year. I filled my elk tag in the Gila National Forest as planned, which achieved my main goal for 2020. However, I wanted to do some more hunting in this normal slow time of the hunting seasons in January, February, and March. As you may know, I launched my Muzzleloaders 101 course in late 2020, where I teach hunters how to safely and effectively hunt with a muzzleloader. The sharp increase in new hunters that we saw last year and the ridiculous demand for guns and ammo that went all through 2020 and continues into early 2021, all that stuff inspired me to create that course. Now, I've hunted with a muzzleloader since 2011 as a way to expand my hunting season, get access to some new places to hunt with fewer other hunters afield, and just as a way of hunting using a really fun short-range weapon. So with all that in mind, I decided to use my muzzleloader on a javelina hunt this year. These New Mexico over-the-counter javelina hunts are for any legal weapon, so I could use a rifle, muzzleloader, or archery equipment. Now, I was going back and forth between using my CVA Paramount and my CVA Optima muzzleloaders. The Paramount has a much longer effective range, but the Optima is a lot lighter and easier to carry. Getting in close is part of the fun with hunting javelina anyway, so I decided to use the Optima. Now, I spent some time at the range with my CVA Optima back in December and January, and I sighted in a new Muzzleloaders Genesis 3 to 9 by 40 millimeter variable scope with a 250 grain power belt Aerolite bullet pushed by 100 grains of loose 777 powder. That load shoots great in my Optima, and I consider it to be ideal for deer-sized game out to about 150 yards. And of course, that would work great on Javelina too, and as you'll see here shortly, it absolutely did the job. Now, the Javelina season opens for my particular tag in mid-January and runs through the end of March. I filled my tag right at the beginning of the season in 2020, but my schedule didn't allow for me to make it out until the very end of February this year. So I headed out Friday morning and I planned on setting up camp, then hunting that afternoon, evening. Now, like I mentioned back in episode 75, I'd stumbled upon an area the Javelina really liked when I first started hunting deer there. There was plenty of food, a reliable supply of water, and a good canyon system that they could use to hide from the wind. Now, the deer liked that area too, so I would consistently see both species in that general area on my hunts during the course of the past few years. I shot my Javelina last year in that general area, so I planned on going back there again this year. Now, the other good news is that this canyon system wasn't visible from the main roads, but it also didn't require a lot of walking to hunt either. So it was kind of, like I said, the best of both worlds, where a lot of other people didn't know about it, but it wasn't super hard to get to. As is often the case up there, it was super windy Friday and Saturday morning. After setting up camp, I headed out to one of my preferred glassing spots that let me observe a part of the canyon that was reasonably sheltered from the wind. Unfortunately, not much was moving that first evening. I saw one deer and no Javelina. That wasn't too surprising, though, because I was dealing with 20 to 30 mile an hour winds that occasionally gusted to 40 to 50 miles an hour. That's not super unusual weather there, but it was still tough sledding, and there was not much moving, even in, like I said, that little bit more sheltered part of the canyon. I was not discouraged, though. It's not uncommon to have a day or two of really strong winds there, followed by a much calmer day where everything would get up and start moving around more. Unfortunately, the next morning was more of the same, though. Really strong winds with little movement, and I did not see anything that morning while I glassed. So I got down off my glassing knob, and I did a little bit of walking into that canyon system where I had previously seen lots of Javelina and deer. I ended up walking about 3.5 miles that morning, and while I didn't see any game in the flesh, I saw tons of fresh deer and Javelina tracks, and lots of really fresh droppings for both species as well. So they were clearly still in the area, even if they weren't in that exact spot. Not surprisingly, I found the most and the freshest sign in the very bottom of those canyons, where there was the most shelter from the wind. Now, I also spotted about 5 deer while driving back to camp for lunch, which further gave me some hope. All things considered, I was a little frustrated and disappointed, but not really discouraged. The bad news, though, that when I checked my phone on getting back to camp, was that the weather forecast was saying it was still going to be pretty darn windy that evening. I didn't have a lot of time left out there. I came out on Friday, and I was planning on going home on Sunday, so I couldn't just wait for the weather to get better, and I needed a new plan. Winds were pretty steady out of the west all day, so I made a plan to head back to the other end of that canyon system to one of my favorite evening glassing spots. I adjusted a little bit to account for the wind, but I found a good spot that let me look into a big basin where I'd previously seen a lot of game. I planned an entry route and a glassing spot that would also let me look into that area without my scent blowing into it with that strong, steady westerly wind. That area was reasonably sheltered from the wind, at least more so than any other place I'd hunted up to that point, so I figured that I'd see some stuff there that evening, and my plan was to head in a couple hours before dark and see what turned up. Now, to this point, I had been carrying my Vortex 10x42mm binoculars in a chest rig with my Leupold Santium 15x56mm binoculars and my Vortex spotting scope in my backpack. Well, those Vortex binoculars work really well from a tripod, and this area I felt was tight enough that I just didn't feel like I needed those 15-power Santiums to glass. I figured the 10-power Vortex binos would work well to ID game, and then I could use my spotter if I needed more magnification. So I left those 15-power Santiums in the truck just so I didn't have to deal with that extra weight. And I also did a few other things to try and change my attitude. Like I said, I was a little discouraged at this point, and I was slipping into some negative thoughts. That sort of attitude can be poisonous, and I have found that it can lead me down a self-fulfilling path to failure on a hunt if I don't get control of things. A pattern that I recognize that I have dealt with in the past is that I'd run into some adversity, get frustrated, then stop being as careful and diligent in my mind because I'm thinking, oh, there's no game here, I'm wasting my time, that sort of thing. Then I unconsciously start making mistakes by being noisy, not minding the wind as much, not looking as hard in my glasses, and just kind of mailing it in when I'm glassing for game, etc. As you can imagine, those mistakes then further decrease my odds of success, and I end up going home empty-handed. Right, the hunting may have been legitimately tough, but I did not do myself any favors on those past hunts by, like I said, getting sloppy and having a bad attitude. So I did what I could to change my mindset. I had a good lunch, I took a little nap, I did a little relaxing in camp, and all that stuff did go a long way towards changing my mindset. Then when I left my truck, I deliberately put a new primer on my muzzleloader, and I said out loud to myself, all right, this is the primer I'm going to kill a javelina with tonight. There was nothing wrong with the old primer, but I found that little things like that can help me change my mindset and give me a confidence boost when I need one. And I also told myself that there were javelina in this new area, and I was going to find them. And if I didn't find them, it was just because I wasn't looking hard enough. So I slipped into that new glassing spot and things were perfect. There was definitely less wind there, and it was blowing across from my right to my left. I was set up on the side of a ridge looking into a reasonably big basin, and there was a small canyon in front of me, maybe 200 yards across, and then that other ridge looped around and created a basin on the far side, with the far ridge maybe 900 yards away from me at the furthest. Now, this area was reasonably thickly vegetated with lots of prickly pear cactus, bushes, and small trees interspersed over the hills, but that is a relative term, and it was still relatively open, and there was a lot of spaces you could walk around in there without running into things and that sort of thing. So I set up my Vortex binoculars on my tripod, and I started glassing. It only took me maybe 20 minutes to spot a couple of mule deer making their way across the basin in front of me, maybe 600 yards away. And so, of course, when you see game, even if it's stuff that you're not necessarily hunting, it is, of course, a confidence boost. Now, I spent the next hour picking the basin apart with my binoculars. There was enough vegetation there to make it challenging, but I was confident that I would see anything that was there if I looked hard enough. I knew deer and javelina really liked that area, and after a little while, I also heard what sounded like a bark from an angry javelina that echoed from the basin, and this further gave me confidence that there probably were javelina in there, and it was just a matter of finding them. I had heard that exact sound from javelina multiple times before as I stumbled upon them, and then they'd grunt/bark at me in confusion or anger. Now, sundown was around 6 p.m. this evening. Well, around 5 p.m., I finally saw it. A javelina moving around on the opposite ridge, clear as day. He was moving with a purpose, like they often do, but he would occasionally stop under a tree or at a clump of cactus and start to eat. I watched for a few minutes, but I never saw more than one at the same time, so I couldn't be certain if I was dealing with a lone boar or if I was seeing part of a group moving across the ridge. In any case, I didn't care too much. I saw javelina, and I had about 1 hour to get into a good shooting position. He was almost directly in front of me, and I ranged him at just over 500 yards. But it wouldn't be too difficult for me to get over there, and the wind was almost perfect for it. And the wind had actually picked up just a little bit, but it still wasn't too bad down in this canyon. However, that was a good thing because I figured it would help mask the sounds of my movement. I used the OnX app on my phone to shoot an azimuth to the javelina, and then I dropped a pin on the map about where I thought he was. Then I quickly packed up and moved out. I was ready to shoot, right? I was wearing clear eye protection, which I highly recommend when hunting with any muzzleloader, and ear protection. So like I said, I was ready to go. I hustled down the hill and I prepared to cross the canyon, but right down there I made a very disappointing discovery. There were about 6 mule deer all the way at the bottom of the canyon, maybe 150 yards off, and they were not happy to see me. Fortunately, they saw but did not smell me, so they were agitated but not really afraid, and they ended up trotting away with a purpose at an angle, and fortunately, they did not go straight up the opposite ridge to where the javelina was, though. I was still unsure if those deer would spook the javelina, though, but at this point, there wasn't much I could do about it, and I just had to continue that stalk and hope for the best. I kept moving up the hill carefully but briskly, and I kept a sharp eye out in front of me in hopes of spotting a javelina before he saw me. Marking that spot on my map was a good idea because, of course, things looked very different on the ground in person than they did from my binoculars on the other hill. I made it up to where I'd previously seen that javelina, though, and he had vanished. Now, it took me about 15 minutes or so to make it over there, so I wasn't too surprised. Well, he was generally moving from my left to my right when I last saw him, so I figured he would keep going in that direction if he didn't get spooked by those deer and if he didn't hear me moving up the hill towards him. Luckily, the wind was blowing from my right to my left, which was perfect. So I started moving in that direction. Then I heard a loud and definite grunt from that direction, which was followed by another grunt. And that was definitely a javelina, and it almost certainly came from a couple of pigs fighting over something. I kept heading in that direction, cresting the top of the ridge, and then slowly going down the other side into an area which was not visible from where I had been glassing earlier. The terrain here was very similar to that general area. It was very rocky ground with small trees, bushes, and clumps of cactus dotting the landscape. I came around from behind a big bush and then immediately spotted a javelina just in front of me, maybe 50 yards away. He had no idea that I was there, and he was doing what they often do, rooting around on the ground and eating something. I could probably have shot him from there, but I did want to get closer. So I quietly cocked my muzzleloader, and I started to close the distance. All the while, he kept feeding and moving around in that area without a care in the world. I was focused primarily on this javelina, so I didn't see any others in the immediate vicinity. However, they're often encountered as part of a group, and the grunts from earlier indicated that there probably was more than one javelina there. And what I did not want to do was to bump an unseen javelina and then spook the whole group. Unfortunately, there wasn't much cover between him and I was pretty exposed where I was standing. So after I moved a little bit closer, I stopped and then aimed offhand. I turned my scope up to about 4 power, and I had a great view of him as he moved around. After a few seconds, he turned broadside, but slightly quartering towards me with his left side facing me. As he stopped to keep eating, I put my crosshair on his shoulder and squeezed the trigger. My muzzleloader boomed and the scope filled with smoke. Luckily, the brisk wind in my face quickly cleared my field of view, and the javelina staggered and grunted at the shot and then tried to run off, but he was clearly hit very badly. He unsteadily ran in 2 complete circles and then fell over, his legs kicking for a few seconds. He ended up falling less than 10 yards from where he was when I shot him. Almost immediately, 3 more javelina emerged from the bushes behind him and stood around in confusion, trying to figure out just what the heck had happened. And I actually had to chase them off to get them to leave. Then amazingly, 3 more javelina appeared from farther down the hill in front of me as I was starting to butcher that javelina a couple minutes later. So he was in a group of at least 7 total animals. If I would have had a friend with me on this hunt, we very likely could have doubled up with this group of javelina, but I just had the 1 tag, so I only shot that 1 boar. I later measured my shot distance at 32 yards. As it turned out, my shot broke his left shoulder, then shredded his heart and both lungs before exiting behind his right shoulder. So that's why he was acting like he was hit so hard, because he was. This was an older, pretty good-sized boar, roughly comparable to the boar I'd shot the previous year. Javelina tend to wear the hair down off their knees as they get older, as they kneel down to eat in that rough, rocky country they inhabit, and this is an indication of an older javelina. Just like my 2020 javelina, this boar had virtually no hair left on the knees of his front legs. So this particular hunt was longer and tougher than my 2020 hunt, but I still had a lot of fun, and I can definitely say that this hunt was more fulfilling. Instead of a chance encounter with the lone boar, which, make no mistake, I was happy to take last year, on this hunt I put some miles on to find out where they were hanging out, I spotted them 500 yards away, and then I put on a good stalk to close the distance to just 30 yards before getting a shot. That is what I would consider to be an almost textbook javelina hunt, and I am thrilled that it worked out like that. So, what are some things you can take away from this hunt? First, finding javelina is usually the hardest part of the hunt. They're not very large animals, so it doesn't take much brush to obscure them. Now, if you're in an area where there are strong indications that they're there, like a long history of seeing them in a spot and seeing lots of fresh sign like I did on this hunt, be diligent and keep your eyes peeled for them. It may take a little while, but you'll probably eventually spot them if they're there and if you're looking hard enough. Don't get discouraged, though. Like I said, I was hunting in the spot where I knew they were there, but it still took me over a full day of hunting to pinpoint exactly where they were. Now, second, find places where they can stay warm and sheltered from the wind. They have a tough time staying warm when it's really cold and windy, so javelina will search for caves and canyons where they can get out of the wind. I just happened to find one, and as a result, I was consistently able to find Javelina out in this part of New Mexico. They probably liked that particular canyon because of the way it was oriented, and they were probably hanging out there in that particular part of that canyon system when I found them because the winds were calmer there from just the direction they happened to be blowing that day. Third, keep your ears open. Javelina aren't deer, and it's not uncommon to hear their vocalizations as they fight with each other. I may well have stumbled onto those Javelina if I hadn't heard them, and I was walking in the right direction after all at that time. But hearing them helped me narrow my search and head directly to the noise. Fourth, if you have the wind in your favor, it is possible to approach Javelina pretty closely. You don't have to be silent, but as long as you don't make any obvious human noises like banging metal on metal, they probably will not spook if you're not being too loud. After all, Javelina aren't exactly quiet animals either, and they're fairly noisy while tearing into cactus and whatnot while eating. I closed the distance from over 500 yards to 32 yards on this group, and it's possible I might have even been able to get closer than that. So keep all that stuff in the back of your mind. Javelina are absolutely a species you can hunt on foot with a shorter ranged weapon like a bow, a handgun, or a muzzleloader. Speaking of muzzleloaders, there has never been a better time to start hunting with a muzzleloader. With the continued shortage of guns and ammo and the increased number of hunters in general, 2021 is the perfect year to start hunting with a muzzleloader to get away from the crowds and to use equipment that is not in such short supply. Now I hear what you're saying. John, that sounds great, but I don't hunt with a muzzleloader right now. I don't know how to use a muzzleloader. I don't even know where to get started in learning how to hunt with one, and I probably can't afford to buy a muzzleloader anyway. What if I told you I could help you out with that process by teaching you how to legally, safely, and effectively hunt with a muzzleloader? What would you say if I said you could buy everything you need to hunt with a muzzleloader, the muzzleloader itself, scope, bullets, powder, primers, and all the accessories you need for way less than what a centerfire rifle costs? That demand for muzzleloader supplies is way lower than what we're encountering for centerfire firearms and ammunition, and that I could get you some exclusive discounts on muzzleloader equipment from the biggest muzzleloader retailer in the USA. Would you like it if I took you by the hand and helped you pick out exactly the right gear you need that works and is legal for you to hunt with in your state? Well, you'll get all that stuff and more with the Muzzleloaders 101 online course. The Muzzleloaders 101 course is an all-in-one solution where I will take you by the hand and guide you through the whole process of getting started hunting with a muzzleloader. I'll help you decide what gear you need, help you save money when you buy that gear, and teach you how to use all that stuff safely and effectively, both at the range and out in the woods. Plus, we are giving away a free muzzleloader to one of the first 100 people who sign up for the course. So if you're considering learning to hunt with a muzzleloader, then you need to take advantage of this opportunity. Remember, due in part to all the craziness going on these days, more people are hunting than ever before, and using a muzzleloader can give you unique access to special seasons and hunting areas where hunting pressure is lower. Hunting with a muzzleloader is also a really fulfilling and enjoyable way to enjoy the outdoors and expand your hunting opportunities. Fortunately, the Muzzleloaders 101 course makes learning how to hunt with a muzzleloader easier than ever. And nowhere else will you find such a comprehensive resource for learning how to use a muzzleloader where you can also save some serious money getting outfitted. So if that sounds appealing to you, head on over to muzzleloaders101.com/buy, B-U-Y, or click the link in the show notes and sign up to get started. And if that weren't enough, I am running a flash sale on the Muzzleloaders 101 course for the next couple of days, and you will never find a better deal on this course than the one I am offering right now. So go to muzzleloaders101.com/buy and sign up today, and you can start enjoying some incredible muzzleloader hunting experiences just like the one I had on this Javelina hunt. Now remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to thebiggamehuntingblog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.